Hello everyone, it's Denise from Dobby Books. So today, instead of doing a Friday Reads, because I have to work tomorrow, I don't know how much time I'm going to have to cover my book haul. So I'm going to do the book haul today, and tomorrow I think the Friday Reads I can cover what I've been reading for the week. So let's do the book haul in this video and let's get started. So this was a special week, and I don't know what started it. Chances are it's because I was at the bookstore and found these combination books that I'm known for collecting. And it just kept going. I just kept seeing these combinations and ended up buying the sets. So let me show you what I mean by that. For example, this was the first one I saw. I had gone to a bookstore over in Ventura, the Barnes & Noble there, and saw this book, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho. And then as I'm walking through the other aisles, meandering and looking around, I was in the kids section, and I saw a version of the same book for young readers, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Boy. So, of course, I grabbed this and I went back upstairs and I grabbed this. So now I have the original geared towards an adult audience, and I have the adaptation for younger readers. And for example, in each book, I want to try to give you a little snippet of how the information is presented differently. So for example, in the original book, we have, I believe it's chapter 5. Hold on, let me look at the table of contents real quick. This book is divided up into three parts. And in part 1, entitled You and Me, chapter 5 deals with the mythical me, angry black men. And it opens with an article which was entitled The Myth of the Dangerous Black Man. And the author, Lori Cassidy, was giving a scenario for herself in this article, saying that if she were walking along a dark street one night and saw 3 male black youths, let's say, not adult men, but youths, walking on the same street as her, coming in her direction, what thoughts would cross her mind? And in describing this scenario, just as it is, what would we in our minds envision those teenagers looking like? How would they be dressed? How would they be walking? How would they be talking? What is it in our perception of them, with the image that we make in our heads as we read this opening in her article? Where do we get these ideas from? Is the image that we've created in our minds a negative one, a positive one, realistic, or based on old ideas that maybe we've never really allowed ourselves to think too much about? And what the author does is, after he's presented this opening scenario by Cassidy and her response to that, and she was honest, she said, I feel a little uneasy. And then she tries to explore why. The author then goes into the next little section after that, and it's entitled Let's Rewind. And this is the format that he has throughout the book. The opening and then the rewind, which goes back to maybe a little history, a little context to that opening story, if you will. And in this one, of course, he's talking about where these ideas of the angry black man are coming from. And then he brings it back after he's gone through that history and finishes off with a part that's called Let's Get Uncomfortable. And he says, like I said, in many cases, the anger of the black man is justified, if not for an immediate offense, then for the long train of historic offenses. It's not white people's job to police the feelings of black people, but as fellow human beings, please grant black people the right to the full gamut of emotions regarding their wounds. Then he goes on with the last part that says, talk it, walk it. I love this. So he's completing the entire process. He says, he talks about, do you think I'm angry? He's honest about his own feelings about that. But he also closes with saying, what you can do right now is start paying attention to how many times white people weaponize their whiteness against black people and how many times the myth of the angry black man leads to violence against one of them. I also invite you all to read social justice educator Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, and also historian Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. If you have children, try Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, or Mahogany Brown's Woke Baby. We got to start the youngins out right. I want to leave you with this. If you see a black man and he is angry, obviously don't assume he's angry because he's black, but also don't assume he's even angry at anything racism related to that moment. Let people have emotions. See him as an individual. So I like how he just sort of closes the whole topic that he's talking about. So this is the same format he'll follow through every single topic covered. And in these chapters, it goes from you and me, us and them, and then we. I just love that format. I think it's just beautifully done. So, and the book's not that long, and it is published by Flatiron Books. And this, I think, was published, look at the year, 2020. All right, now, the edition for young readers, this one, which changed the title a little bit, covers the same topics, of course, streamlines them a little bit. And this book is divided into 1, 2, 3 parts as well with the same titles, Me and You, Us and Them, and We. Shortened. He has the same opening. Let's rewind, and he covers a little, obviously, for adult readers, if you bring up the Tulsa Massacre, if you bring up Emmett Till, topics such as that, we know the history. We're familiar enough with those names. But in this book for young readers, obviously the authors understand that young readers may not have the full story. So he will explain a little bit more of those particular stories and then apply them to the point that he's trying to make. And this is done throughout the book, but it has the same format of talking about it, giving context, then going back to let's get uncomfortable, and then he closes it up at the end like that. So here is the set. Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho, and Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Boy. And I do want to emphasize that in this book, the author, Emmanuel Acho, talks about how he is the son of immigrants from Nigeria. So he not only, he grew up in Texas. He said he was going to a private school. And I think he said he was one of the only black students there, if not the only one. He said, I stuck out like a sore thumb. So he didn't really feel like he fit in there. There was a struggle to fit in there. Plus, when he went to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, it was a black church. Vast majority of the membership was black. But the culture was not Nigerian. So he was trying to figure out where he fit in there, explaining the difference it made for him. So he wasn't this, if I can use the term, traditional African American. That was, generations living in this country, and just like when I think of like Mexican Americans, they are Mexican in their blood and in their customs that they've brought over from Mexico. But once you have successive generations living in the United States, there's changes to that, and they become their own identity, their own American identity, which doesn't really blend in with white identity. but back in Mexico, they'd stick out like a sore thumb. They're not Mexican. It's that in between space, right? And the same thing holds true here. Here's this kid who's a first generation American, has Nigerian parents with Nigerian customs, Nigerian food, and he's stuck between two places. So he goes into that more here, whereas here he focuses a little bit more on being this young kid, the only black kid in a white private school, and then he goes to church and he didn't really blend in with the church culture there either. This is the author, Emmanuel Acho. There we go. All right, now, next book collection that I found is this one. There are 1, 2, 3. I found all 3. I found the third one, I think. The 2 I found at the same Barnes and Noble, and the third one I had to go, oh, I don't know, maybe 5 miles, 7 miles into the next town, and I found that last one, which of course I had to have because I had the other 2. This one is a title a lot of you will be familiar with. Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong by James Loewen. This, he has not rewritten, he has not updated this since, let me see, it originally came out in 1980. And it was highly offensive because it questioned what was being taught in American high schools. When he did the original book, he had to read through 12 US history books. And he likes to joke about how he needed therapy after that because it was just, number one, he said it was so droll. It was just so boring and monotonous and just blah. No wonder kids didn't like history. But he said there were 2 books, and he mentions the 2 titles that were the same, word for word. And all the stuff that's in these history books, these thick US history books, these hardbound thick history books, which cost a lot of money for the school districts, makes a lot of money for their publishers. He just sort of wondered, doesn't anybody read these books? Don't the history teachers notice anything in this? And he also questioned, where's the critical thinking here? There's nothing in these books that is showing the information, but also trying to bring in some conversation about this, perhaps a little debate about this. There was nothing like that. It was just bland, just completely uninteresting and dull. And he had put together, sometime after this original publication, a book on Mississippi's history with other co-authors, and they put in a series of 10 questions to encourage students to think critically with any sort of information that they were reviewing. And in this, now this is from the intro, this is from a preface. Okay, this is from a preface of this book here. So I think it's the most recent one. And these 10 questions are the following, and I'm changing them a little bit because he will go he, she, which is tedious. So I'm just going to replace those 2 with they, because it covers everybody and it's much quicker and easier to read through. So question number 1, when and where did the author live? 2, for what purpose did they write? What audience did they have in mind? 3, what was the author's social class? 4, what was their race, sex, or age? 5, what were their basic assumptions about Black people, about white people, about Indians or others? 6, what was their ideology? 7, do they cite facts to support their conclusions? Number 8, does what they say about Mississippi seem to be true from your own experience? 9, how do their conclusions compare with those of other authors you have read? Are they biased? And number 10, is what they're talking about relevant to your life and to present-day society? And these are questions that the author, in placing them in his own book on the history of Mississippi, was hoping other historical authors would put in their own textbooks dealing with American history in general, even state history. And he says that he has yet to see that in any history book. So it's just excellent ideas. The perspective he had. But okay, that's enough on this. I think we know this book well enough. And I think in this day and age, at the current climate that we're in, I think this would be an excellent book to review. It's not terribly huge. I think it has important enough information for us that we're going to see it with new eyes right now in a way that we probably couldn't have done so maybe 3 years ago even, right? So there's this. Then I found the one that was adapted for younger readers. And this is a hardback copy. I don't know if it's in paperback. It may well be. This one was published in 2019. He opens with the story of Helen Keller. And he mentions how in reading the history or the story or the life of Helen Keller, he says, do you notice that when we read about her story, it always stops at a certain point in her life, and we don't know what happens to her in adulthood. Really, we don't. And it's very minimal. Oh, she lived to be this number of years, and she always stayed with her teacher, and this is where she lived. There's nothing really substantial in that. It's just this really, again, minimal kind of information. But in this, he talks about what happens in the first chapter, Handicapped by History. He talks about the problem of hero making. So we've painted Helen Keller to be a hero. But what we don't talk about is what she did as an adult in her life. Here it will go into much more information, but I want to go into this one here, the one for young people, which cuts to the chase. In her adulthood, Helen Keller became a committed socialist, and she was influenced by her experience of being a blind person, a person with a handicap. And she started to learn about how blindness was more likely to happen to someone who was poor, someone disadvantaged in some way. It really did go by class in society, which offended her. She thought, how unfortunate. Why do people have to go blind? He said, you have the worker doing some dangerous job going blind because of an injury. You have women who have had to turn to prostitution going blind because of sexually transmitted diseases. She said, this is something that shouldn't have to happen. So she really fought to change that. She wanted to I guess, sort of turn people's thinking around to consider a different option. She was considered a radical in her time. She joined the Socialist Party of Massachusetts in 1909, and she even cheered the Russian Revolution of 1917. Her commitment to socialism came from her experience as a disabled person and her sympathy for others with handicaps. Many Americans scorned and feared socialism in Keller's time and afterward. Becoming a socialist turned her from one of the most famous women on the planet to one of the most notorious. Having fought so hard to speak, Keller helped create the American Civil Liberties Union to fight for the free speech of others. In addition to raising funds for the American Foundation for the Blind, she supported the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And this from a woman, a white woman from Alabama in the 1920s. It says here, not everyone will agree with Helen Keller's ideas and beliefs. Today, her praise of Russia seems at best poorly informed. Some may even think it was treasonous. But few Americans even know she was a radical because our schools and mass media have left it completely out of her story. Now that I've shown you these two books, so the original, Lies My Teacher Told Me, with the young people's version of Lies My Teacher Told Me, I found this, a graphic novel version. Isn't this the coolest thing? Oh my gosh, great cover. Love the cover. This was adapted by Nate Powell, and I will show you. This is the part on Helen Keller. So I'm showing you that we know about her life when she was little, but as she gets older, it just sort of fades and no one knows diddly squat about it. And they talk about her fight and how she fought for women's right to vote. She was at the march, the National March for Women's Suffrage. It was a walk. I don't know, it was just a mile long or whatever it was. It took 6 hours to complete this march because the crowds that were present during the march were so hostile to the women in their walk. It took 6 hours to complete, and she was so frazzled by the end of that that she had to give up. She just couldn't give her speech that she had planned to give that day. So yeah, she was tough as nails. Good for her. All right. Next book I found. I already owned the original. I didn't realize that there was another version, an adaptation for young readers. And this is an adaptation of Howard Zinn's History of the United States. But they've entitled it A Young People's History of the United States. Is that way cool? It's just as thick. Here's the original. Oh, gotta hold these pages together. There we go. So I've had this for a while. And this was published, was this the one that was published in, came out in 1980. The first print was a few thousand hardcover copies, considered modest. It found an audience excited to read a book that provided such a comprehensive and artful bottom-up view of history. All right, so far so good. With Lies, I just had the year wrong. With Howard Zinn, it was different because in 1980, a lot of the histories were still hero-based. So history from the top, basically. Howard Zinn flipped that, and he provided a history from the bottom up. This was refreshing in 1980, but it was a history that was left-leaning rather than right-leaning. And Howard Zinn fundamentally changed the way millions of people think about history with A People's History of the United States. He would be the first to say, however, that he didn't do so alone. The book grew out of his awareness of the importance of social movements throughout U.S. history, some of which he played an active role in during the 1960s and the 1970s and beyond, namely the Civil Rights Movement, mass mobilizations to end the Vietnam War, as well as other anti-war movements and the many movements for higher wages and workers' rights and the rights of women, Latinos, North Americans, gays and lesbians, and others. And then he goes on to mention certain names who influenced his view of history. And with the young people's history of the United States, the only changes made, it's essentially the same thing, and I'm sure it has been abridged because they use far less space on each page. By the way, it has some fantastic illustrations. The only changes made to the young person's version of it is now who is this? This was in this particular note on the edition. It says Howard Zinn ended his revolutionary account of American history around 2006. While this edition of A Young People's History of the United States cannot carry the full story of America beyond that point, it does add to the story in a few key places. Scholar and educator Ed Morales has contributed new material about Latino history in the United States. The writer of this intro, I have added a couple of insights into Native American history based on recent research, as well as a look at the Asian American activism that flourished alongside other social movements in the 1960s and the 1970s. I also built on his concluding challenge by recognizing some of the young American activists who are, in his words, rising like lions to protest injustice and bring about change. So those are the additions made to the young people's version, which are not going to be in this particular one. But I was just so excited to find a young people's version of Howard Zinn's book. So here we go, young people's version and the original. All right, next one. This is the last one, and it's the one that had the most editions on it. I didn't realize it had 4. I always thought it had maybe 3. So here we go. This one. You've heard of the book Stamped from the Beginning? Well, they have Stamped for Kids. Okay, so this one would be for ages 6 to 10 years old. And I want to go through the different chapters. Oh, there's 1, 2, 3. There's 24 chapters. Each one of these chapters for this age group is about 4 pages long. And it has a, let me go to the back, because I want to talk more about the original book. It has a timeline. It has a glossary and suggestions for further reading, and it starts with illustrated books, works its way to chapter books, and then for older readers. And the last little section, oh, those are the acknowledgments. Okay, and that's it. There it is. That's what I wanted to find. The reading guide. So this one has the reading guide in the back of the book. Lovely little illustrations throwing in. Of course, we know who this is. And then they have one for young people. So this version, same book, goes up to the next age group. So let's say from ages 12 and up, 12 to 18, let's say. So this is stamped. Doesn't say for young people, but this is for, so this would be tweens, maybe 6 to 10, upper elementary, and this would be middle grade. This one is this thick, and this one is this thick. And I believe it has the same topics. Nothing's been left out. Looking at the table of contents. This book, the first one I showed you for ages 6 to 10, the table of contents are broken up into topics. So like this. The one for middle grades are broken up into sections with their subtitles below them. And those sections are divided up chronologically. So time periods. But it goes into the beginnings of racism, how it was invented, how it spread throughout Europe, how it came over to the United States, etc., and how it continues to influence us today. And the stories in this book, I'm sorry, I'm stalling. The stories in this book, the same stories in this book, are about 8 pages long. So twice as long as the book for young readers. The original book is a behemoth. Well, all right, chunker. It's a big book, stamped from the beginning. Author Ibram X. Kendi. And this is broken up into, not sections, part 1, part 2. So this, I believe, has 4 parts to it, 5 parts to it. And it goes into names. So part 1 is Cotton Mather. Part 2, Thomas Jefferson. Part 3, William Lloyd Garrison. Part 4, W.E.B. Du Bois. And part 5, Angela Davis. And I want to see what it has in the back here. This has discussion questions. A reading group guide. Cool. When was this originally published? 2016 was the original copyright. This particular edition is published 2023. So here's the original. And then this is the book I already had, and I know I mentioned it in one of my previous videos, Stamps from the Beginning, the graphic novel. Oh, this is an awesome collection. I mean, gosh, I've got it for every age group and every genre loving group. Let's see. I want to go. So here are the three people that are talked about in the original group. There's one more on the other side that I haven't shown you, but they bring them up here in the graphic novel. W.E.B. Du Bois and Angela Davis. Fascinating. All right, so here's the graphic novel version. Middle grade version, ages 12 to 18. Young readers version, ages 6 to 10. And the original. So I have 4 editions of this book. 4. Did you know that there were 4 editions of this same book? I didn't. Now I do. That's awesome. So there we go. Those are all the books. There's no way I'm going to be able to show these to you. Let's see. So these are the finds I found in just a week. I've done like a month's worth of book buying. Look at this. These are all the books. Yeah. There we go, people. If you have any questions on these, go ahead, drop me a comment. That's my book haul for the week. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. I love you. I'll see you in just a few days. Bye-bye.